Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Discussion Bound. My name is Christy McMillan. I'm the Director of Learning and Engagement here at the Asheville Art Museum, and I'm joined by one of our touring docents, Barbara Pressman, who will be moderating today's discussion of I Always Loved You, a novel by Robin Oliveira. Barbara chose today's book to read and discuss for two reasons. One was this recent painting that was in an exhibition that closed just a few weeks ago called The Laundress Ironing by Edgar Degas. And this work, The Manicure by Mary Cassatt, in the museum's collection. We like to always choose books and lead our programs that coordinate with the museum's collection or our special exhibitions. And so these are the two inspirations for today's book. Before we get started, you probably noticed that your microphone and video were muted by default. In just a moment, I'll make it so that you can unmute your microphone to participate in today's book discussion. For the best experience, choose a quiet room and close the door. Please do silence any alerts from nearby devices as they can be very distracting during the program. If you do choose to turn on your video, which I hope that you do so that we can have a conversation as if we're sitting in a room together, try not to sit in front of a window, lamp, or other strong source of light or movement as it makes it difficult to see you. Use headphones and microphone for best sound quality. While you can log on using a smartphone, we recommend using a desktop, laptop, or tablet in order to see slides and meeting tools on the larger screen. As today is a discussion, make sure that your screen name includes your first name and last initial or first name and last name so that we know who we're talking to. In order to ask questions or make comments, participate in the discussion throughout the hour, we would ask you just to unmute your microphone when Barbara or I ask for questions or comments. You can also type any questions or comments that you have in the chat box. A third way to participate is to raise your hand in the participant sidebar, and I'll call on you and ask you to unmute your microphone. Typing in the chat box and raising your hand in the participant sidebar can sometimes take a while to get to your comment, so please do feel free just to jump in when you'd like. Finally, we are recording. If you prefer not to be recorded, make sure that your video and audio remain muted and use the chat box to submit any questions or comments that you have. As we always do for Discussion Bound, Barbara and I have developed a few questions to help guide our conversation. We're not at all wedded to these questions and are happy to sort of let the conversation go where it may, but here are some of the thoughts that we had when we were reading this book and putting it together today. As always, what were your general impressions of the book? What do you think about the fictional relationship that the author created between Mary Cassatt and Edgar Degas? And what are the pros and cons of exploring the lives of historical figures in fiction? I kept thinking about that throughout the whole time that I was reading the book. In this book, were Cassatt's and Degas' art diminished or elevated by their relationship? Why or how? In the 19th century, the École des Beaux-Arts held enormous power in making or breaking an artist's career in France through their annual salon exhibition. What positive and negative effects on artists did the author describe? And in the present day, who or what validates good art? Great question, Barbara. To late 19th century audiences, the Impressionists' ways of seeing and working were radically different. How or why? Why was Cassatt drawn to understand other artists' creative processes? And how did Cassatt, Degas, and other artists try to capture what they thought of as real? Many of Cassatt's paintings capture the love between mother and child, as well as women at home or at leisure. Why? There's a very big reason why. What challenges did Cassatt face in Paris as a woman, as an artist, as an American? How were they reflected in her work? Cassatt's father asks her, what is the purpose of any endeavor if not to make money? And how does an artist tell whether or not he is successful? How would you answer these questions? Edward Manet died at the height of his fame, whereas Degas lived for years unable to create. In your opinion, which artist suffered the worst fate? This one was really great as we got towards the end of the book. The novel intimates that Manet married his father's mistress, Suzanne, while his own mistress, artist Berthe Morisot, married his brother. How do these tangled relationships influence events in the novel, the characters' happiness, careers, and family lives? And finally, what impact did the Impressionists have on art that came after them? So I won't have these questions up on the screen, but it's just something to keep in mind, and Barbara and I will come back to them throughout the discussion. But before we do, Barbara, you had a video that you wanted us to watch in order to get ready for the discussion.
I need to unmute myself if I want to speak. I always loved art, and in particular, always loved the Impressionism, and read many, many books. So when we had our training on Across the Atlantic, this book popped into my mind because I remember really enjoying the book because it gave a really good insight into what it was like to live during that, what is it, they call it the Grand Siècle. But as Christy pointed out, I kept thinking about, is this a true story? And you know how fiction puts words in the mouths of people and we're not sure. Marie Cassatt burned the letters that existed between the two of them. Maybe we want to create a love affair between them. Maybe there was nothing, but I thought it was interesting. And I found this very interesting video. And I thought that it would be a good place to start to know academically where they stood together. So if you would start the video for us, Christy.
Having this painting here that has this sort of interesting backstory, this sort of mystery behind it, was really exciting.
This relationship between Degas and Cassatt, she sees something and then she adapts it so it becomes her own. Nobody would ever mistake a Cassatt for a Degas.
You've got two of the greatest names of the 19th century together. They had a collaboration that has bordered, or at least given rise to rumors of all kinds of interesting things. But they were the two great masters of the era, especially the post-impressionist era. And they collaborated, they exchanged works of art, they worked together, they formed a bond that's unique in the history of art.
Booz Allen is pleased to be able to participate in events of this kind. And I would hope that the people who come to this show get to experience the richness of the art, understand some of the mystery that's behind some of this art, the complexities that are there, and walk away feeling that they're enriched, not only with the beauty of what they've seen, but also perhaps unlocking some of the mysteries of the art that's here, and come away feeling that this has been a great enlightening experience for them.
Having The Little Girl in the Blue Armchair, which is, of course, this extraordinary painting, I really believe is her first true Impressionist painting. You don't let anyone just come into your studio and work on your painting. It really speaks to Mary Cassatt's confidence, her trust in Degas, but also Degas' respect for Cassatt. Degas definitely opened a lot of doors for Cassatt. He really didn't seem to treat her any differently because she was a woman. He basically viewed her as a person and he respected her enormously. We've always known that there was a relationship between Edgar Degas and Mary Cassatt, that they were friends, they exhibited together, but the nature of that relationship has always been speculative.
We learn that she is an artist like many others in the 19th century, interested in paint, interested in revealing process. You can really see the distinction in brushwork, strong vertical strokes, and then something that's sort of flatter and mushier. I don't want to read too much into it, but it's possible that really is the difference between Degas and Cassatt's hands.
Perhaps this is the area where Degas had something to do with the picture. There's something about it that's certainly very Degas-like, and has a certain independence from the rest of the picture as well.
Really, all we've known about these two artists has come from anecdote. And what we discovered was what he did was actually relatively minimal. It was very discreet, very subtle. He didn't simply pick up a palette and start repainting the canvas wholesale. It's the kind of interplay that colleagues have, that peers have, the kind of thing that, you know, two people will batting ideas back and forth between one another.
I don't think he actually repainted her picture.
No.
My guess is he comes into her studio, he makes some suggestions, and leaves her and says, now you carry on. I think partly because he has so much respect for her as an artist.
You don't need to know much about these artists beyond the basic facts to really get it. In just 4 rooms, it tells this amazing story, and the story is on the walls itself.
I wish I could have seen that exhibition.
So do I, but I guess maybe we can be on the lookout for something like that, because actually in doing my research, I came across quite a few articles about Degas and Cassatt, and I think I gave some to Christy to send out to you so that you can explore. And there were also several about Morissette and Manet. And I even ran across a blog that suggested they should make a movie about their life. So there is a lot of interest in the painters of the Impressionistic era, because they have had such an impact on modern art. So I guess we can begin with our questions. The impression that this, do you think we should leave the questions up on the screen?
No, I can just pull them up. So the first question was to everyone, just in general, what were your general impressions of the book? And that's usually the way I phrased the question, and hadn't really thought about that it was the apt word for today. What do you think about the fictional relationship the author created between Cassatt and Degas, and what are the pros and cons of exploring the lives of historical figures? So anyone who wants to start, feel free to jump in.
Raise your hand so I can see who you are. Or just jump in. No thoughts on that?
Go ahead, Sharon. You're muted.
Okay.
Yep.
I love historical fiction. I like reading it. I think it really brings to life so many things that we can't imagine exactly what happened in the past. We, of course, see it through our more modern eyes and our more modern values, maybe. But it is fascinating to, I'm certain the women in the audience here, to know that she was one of the people who forged ahead. And although she wasn't allowed, you know, to go into the École Beaux-Arts when she got to France, and she was not allowed to, even when she got to an art place, allowed to have live models, because that was not very, you know, nice for women to see a person, especially if they were nude. That would be absolutely a no-no. So they had to paint busts, and they had to do, you know, all kinds of things to try to further their own education. Hiring tutors, I think, was the main part. But, you know, the historical part, we have to be careful to think that we know what their relationship totally was. We certainly know there was a friendship, but they helped each other. Maybe he helped her a little more than she helped him, but she also had funds, and he didn't always have funds. So maybe that's not written down. Maybe he helped a little more that way too. But I thought it was a wonderful pick on Barbara's part, and just, you know, got us all talking about something that we all love, art.
I saw
Absolutely.
Jay wrote that she loved it and she wished it could be true. And I think the romanticism is just lends itself to the period of time. And I think perhaps, I don't know, that maybe thinking of a woman who wasn't married on her own with pressure to get married in that time span might have developed a crush on her mentor.
Mm-hmm.
Other general thoughts about the book? Go ahead,
She
Doris.
was, go ahead, Doris.
Doris, then Billy.
I guess going back to that first question, my general thought was I enjoyed reading the book, more so about the artistic process and the situation of women artists during that time. But just to the original question, I have some ethical concerns about taking real people and imposing into their private lives, particularly any intimacy. I mean, it's, one thing to talk about how one might have been the mentor to the other, but when you start talking about someone's romantic feelings or something, I just imagine if it were me, not that anyone would ever want to write a book about me, but, how would I feel about that? And I guess if I were dead, I wouldn't feel anything, but anyway, that's, but I guess I just, I just kind of cringed during some of those parts because I just felt it wasn't right to invade someone's privacy like that. But I thought the other parts of the book, I thought, really could have stood on their own as well without the romance.
Billy?
It was interesting how she was portrayed, interesting to me, the portrayal of the strong influence the two men in her life had upon her, and how she struggled with that influence.
And do you mean Degas and her father?
And her father, yes. And then all of the other men around, but the really strong influence came from Degas and her father, I thought, and how she struggled to break out of that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of women today even still struggle to break out of that.
Right. She was in her sort of early to mid 30s when the novel started, and throughout the main course of the action sort of got to her later 30s, and then at the end was probably, I don't know, I didn't do the math, and maybe her 70s or something. But yeah, over the course of her life, sort of the strong influence of men. Barbara, you, I know, did a little bit of research on Robin de Oliveira, the author, and her process writing the book. How much of it was truth or based on firsthand sources, letters, journals, things like that, and how much of it was pure fiction?
It was documented. A lot of the criticism was definitely documented, all of the critiques of their artwork. And yesterday I listened to a very interesting YouTube, if anybody is interested in Marie Cassatt, because she's a really influential in the American Impressionist movement and in bringing Impressionism to the United States. But there was a book that was published of all the critiques. So all of the critiques were true, and I think there were the salons and there were the friendships. So she was pretty close to the different showings and the different salons and what pieces were there, because, there was that time when they were trying to make that print book and then they never displayed it, and how Degas didn't bring some of his artworks to some of this. So I think she was pretty, she stuck to the framework of the time and the things that occurred there. That she stuck to the coal, and the salon, and how it could make or break people and why it was so important. And I thought she documented the infighting within the Impressionist as to, well, if you show in the salon, then you can't show with us. And I think that was another book that I read many years ago about Pizarro went into a lot of that, because it was like herding cats. It wasn't easy to keep this group of artists together. So I think in a lot of ways she was historically accurate. The love affairs were her imagination, and that's why it's called historical fiction. And I guess I kind of like hearing those stories, and I can understand Doris's feeling not to intrude on a person's private life. So.
I had the same thought as Doris, though, in that these are beloved figures. These are people that loom large in our imaginations as art lovers. They're historical figures that have their legacies. And it could have been very easy to just sort of thinly veil characters with names that were similar but weren't, you know, purported to be the actual historical figures. And I thought that it was very bold of the author to sort of present them as the actual artists without trying to change their names or, as I said, thinly veil them. But in your research, Barbara, did you uncover that there were any firsthand sources that she used specifically about the private lives in order to inform the course of her story?
No, just that they were very close and they were in and out of each other's lives constantly. They owned a lot of things. And I think in one of the pictures there, they showed a fan. And at one of the showings, they traded artwork and he gave her that fan. And it was very beloved to her. Maybe it was beloved because it was from Degas, maybe it was beloved because she had other interest in it, but it was in many of her other artworks, that fan. And I think there is a picture of her later in life where the fan is prominently displayed on her wall behind her. There were no specific, you know, that there was a romance between them, but there are considered documentations of them being together, working together, collaborating together, and spending a great deal of time alone together. And I don't know, I was thinking of like when Harry met Sally, maybe they think that, you know, she thought nobody could be friends or that close a friend or be collaborate and not do that. She did take a literary license by creating.
It's historically accurate to know that women did not associate themselves closely with men at that time. So there's a lot of accuracy there, and that and the research and work that I've done indicates that they were unusually close. And so I think that that may be the foundation of the fiction.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and yeah, I agree, and they did bring that out, that usually there had to be a chaperone, and they were in a lot of situations where there was not a chaperone. And I also thought it was interesting because of all that was said about Berthe Morisot and Manet. Well, that might be her next book, because I thought that had more documentation to indicate that there might have been something going on in that relationship.
Yeah, I think that relationship is sort of presented as fact. It's not something that's questioned or has gray areas, much as the relationship between Degas and Cassatt. Go ahead, Sharon.
Well, back to the art. I was thinking, it's kind of, I was doing some extra reading also, like Barbara was when I finished that book, because it was interesting. And it seems that Mary Cassatt did not have the great trouble that some of the Impressionists had in getting into the real salon from the Académie des Beaux-Arts. She was actually in that salon 8 years. And in the last year she was in, she sold a piece. So, you know, you can still be starving if you're in that salon. However, she actually made it through the judging, which was really miraculous for the time. And then, of course, at a time when the other Impressionists, like Sisley, Manet, and Degas, did not get their pieces in, which is what led to their unhappiness. So I thought it was interesting. I think her last piece in the real salon was in 72, and in the Impressionist salon opened in 74. And that's when she joined in with that. So I thought that was kind of fascinating, that here she had so much trouble with trying to get some education in the field of art and you know, what she was to produce. And yet she was a little bit ahead of them. She did make note of the fact that she was very unhappy with the salon, even though she did get pieces in, that she felt the judging often wasn't fair, and it was, of course, skewed to the people that the judges liked and whatever. But
Political.
I thought that was kind of interesting that she was making her way ahead there without his help as much as we might think. And I think he did help her, but she was going good for girlfriend.
And Catherine, you had made a comment in the chat that's sort of along the same lines, and I don't know if you want to go ahead and unmute yourself and talk a little bit about this, but you said, I wondered if Cassatt would have had the same inclusion with the Impressionists without Degas' friendship and invitation to the group.
I just wondered the way it was depicted that, you know, he was her entrance into that in the Thursday night meetings and the things like that. I don't know how much that's based on fact, but I would think being a woman and being an American and then being introduced into that group that already had their very solid opinions of who should and shouldn't be involved. Sometimes when you have someone in a group bring you in that already has standing in a group, it's a big deal, you know, to have that stamp of, I'm bringing this person in, I'm already have good standing. And I just thought that was an interesting dynamic of the Impressionist. We tend to think, or at least I do, and I'm not as well versed in art as y'all seem to be, but that the Impressionists that we now call and put in this group, that the group was actually very, not so solid as I thought they were.
Yeah.
I think is such an interesting point, because you see them in galleries together, you hear about them together. So I'm picturing this beloved group of people just pushing their way through, and it's an interesting thing. They're individuals and individual opinions, and that they're human. And I thought that brought to light a great feeling for me to think that to go back before we named them, like before we put them all together in a gallery. Do you see what I'm saying? So before it was presented how it is now. And for me, as a not as well versed in art, that was impactful. So I appreciated that part of thinking. It made me go back to the beginning.
The only thing that really united them at the beginning was their being rejected. So the first Impressionist exhibition, if you will, was because they were all rejected from the salon and they wanted their works to be seen together, but it didn't necessarily have anything to do with, their style being the same or their working practices being the same or anything like that. And they were very loosely united as a group, and their styles were very different. And if you think about it, an impression is something that's very individual and subjective. And so it makes sense that they weren't all painting the same way.
And there was also there was a quote in the book where Marie Cassatt said that displaying in the salon was like wearing a corset, and she couldn't breathe because there was a formula to the creation of the art. They had to have the dark background, they had to have certain colors, and she felt that it would free her up. So, and I think didn't read it in this book or any, but I remember it had been called the Gallery of the Refusee. It was like the
refused, the rejected.
The rejects. It was
the rejects. Yeah, that's right. Billy, you had your hand up.
And don't you think it's important to contextualize this additionally, because as Barbara said, we're looking at through the eyes of 2021. That at the time that all of this was taking place, the way that one painted and people went on the grand tour to see the academic art that had been created for centuries by Europeans. And this break was being done by the French, who have been seen by many cultures as being people who color outside of the lines, to use a art expression. And so for her parents, for their daughter, we all have children, think of your daughter at that time decides that she's going to take off and go to, I kept, as I was reading this, trying to put myself into that place and thinking, okay, now she is taking off with, as my father said when I met my husband and I was 30, to my stepbrother, and they said, where did she go? And my father said, she's taken off with a California playboy. Now, he was a businessman who lived in Los Angeles. He wasn't. So, but just to put it into that context, so then you have these people who are really renegades and breaking from the norms. It must have been, in many ways, very scandalous.
That's so interesting, Billy, that of all the people in the book, you were sort of sympathizing with her parents. And I hadn't really thought about, you know, the way that the author wrote the book is she didn't, I mean, it was largely from Mary Cassatt's point of view, but it wasn't exclusively from Mary Cassatt's point of view. And it was certainly not a first person point of view. It was told in the third person, but she was sort of omniscient and allowed us to follow different people, whether it was Mary Cassatt's sister Lydia, or the parents, or Degas, or Baird Morisot, in order to give us sort of different points of view. And I'm wondering, just like Billy seemed to find a special sympathy with the parents, did other people find sympathy with other characters besides Cassatt? Anyone? Go ahead, Catherine.
Abigail, you know, Alcott, I thought when she had her life all together and she said, I finally have everything. I can't believe I would have it. And then she died in childbirth or after childbirth. But that she really got me, because I think she was the example of trying to have not only the artistic abilities and being out there, but also to be the mom and to have the husband, and which Mary had kind of given up even thinking about having, but just being devoted to her art, as shown by the art. I mean, as shown by the writer. I don't know if that's true or not, but I was very, my heart just sort of broke when she had it all. She was so happy, and then she passed away, and I thought, that's so tragic, you know. And that I liked following her. She was a little bit of a side character, but I just really liked how she proceeded through life and how she chose to go. It was a different path, but I thought it was beautifully done.
Thanks, Catherine. Anyone else have sympathy for someone other than the main character?
I loved her sister, but I also, Lydia was wonderful, but I also think that something we need to think about with her parents being there is financial and emotional support. Not too many women would ever have been afforded that opportunity if they did not. I mean, she was doing it okay on her own, but when her parents came and she had her whole family there, I think they provided a support system for.
But don't you think she was torn by that? It was nice to have her family there, particularly her sister, but her father breathing down her neck and contextualizing everything that she was doing and relating it to her finances. And, you know, how are you going to earn a living? Let me say just one other thing, and that is, I think of her, I had sympathy for her as well, because when our son was in university, one of his closest friends was an art student. And I spoke with her the last week when she had to do her presentation. This was at WashU in St. Louis. She had to do a presentation of her oeuvre of work from the 4 years. And she called me just in tears, and she said, everything I've done for 4 years now is going to be judged. I don't think I can stand it. And we think about, I mean, I have closets full of pottery that I've made that I wouldn't sell because who would want to buy it? And so for her to be able to do this and to deal with all of the different dynamics that were going on around her, I had great sympathy and empathy for her.
Billy and Catherine, since y'all, and Barbara, since y'all had particular sympathy for other characters, did you fall down the rabbit hole of Google trying to learn more about these other people than Mary Cassatt and Edgar Degas?
I kept Googling everything, and I kept Googling all of the paintings, and I was thinking, oh my goodness, I'm so glad I have my iPhone. I can see all of these paintings every time they would come up. And but I thought that, I mean, we're doing a really good job. I mean, did anybody else keep Googling? I know that Barbara Heller, she's not saying anything, but she sent me an interesting article yesterday about a painting that was used to represent Mother's Day by Cassatt. And so it was very, there is a lot to be read, and there's a lot, it's very interesting time. But I wanted to bring up that point about the salon. Who in this day and age creates what's good art and what is shown?
I thought that was a great question, Barbara.
But I think it's important to know. I think, you know, I think we need to think about that.
Well, think about the debate of photography. And is photography art? So it still goes on. Or how about, remember the book that we read about my second grader or third grader could have done that? That anything that's new is questioned. But the salon was the rigid, that was the foundation of art for, as I said, for centuries.
Well, what do you think is the pantheon, or what is the deciding factor of what's good art? Is it Sotheby's? Is it showing in the Metropolitan Museum of Art? Is it certain galleries that choose to show artwork? What do you think?
Well, Mr. Cassatt said it's what sells. He was obviously very interested in making a living, and his son, other children made great livings. And of course, you were expected to support daughters at that time. If she didn't get married, he was going to have to keep supporting her, which I think he was taking the long view that this could go on for many, many years. And I think when he got to Paris, he told her that when they moved there, he told her that was it in terms of him supplying art supplies. I guess he would feed her and house her, but if she wanted to have an art supply, then the art that she sold had to pay for the supplies to make another painting.
And her studio.
Yeah, put a little kibosh on that. But another thing that I think was important, and I don't know that it came out in the book all that much, was that from all that I've read of this group, Degas was not a happy character. He was a very sarcastic man. He was a person not well liked by the others, frequently put out of their cafe discussions or whatever, and very, very difficult to get along with, just personally. And I thought, so that was kind of in my mind as I read the book, and I didn't see it come out in the book particularly. Maybe she was being kind to him, which was nice. But then as I was reading about her, now this was not in the book, but she had a very good friend called Emily Sartain. And Emily, who traveled with her and studied with her and whatever, she did have a lot of women friends, said that Mary was outspoken and very self-centered. Ooh. So, you know, and we're all left with the impression that she was just a genteel lady of that era and whatever. And so apparently she had a bit of a feisty personality, and I think Degas did as well.
But what would qualify as self-centered in the 19th century?
Right.
Someone who didn't get married, who didn't take care of their parents, who didn't live for other people, someone who wanted to pursue her own interests and passions and live her own life.
Yeah. And she made
which to me just sounds like someone who's living their best life and being true to themselves, but in a 19th century lens would be seen as contrary to womanhood.
Yeah, it wouldn't be feminine, and you know, yes.
Catherine had something to say about that.
Well, I was going to go back to the question about what is art and what we were saying, and about how I think it has an answer that is both individual and then more in the world. So that when you heard Degas say, why is Manet or why is he concerned about what other people think of his art, or why you should make it how you want to make it? And I don't know if that's how he really felt, but I find, so I'm a photographer. So I find with my photography that there is a feeling of what I feel when I see what I see through the lens of my camera and what I produce, that feels in a way that gives me an emotional feeling that art gives me. Do you know, that's my own feeling, whereas someone could see it and not have that same thing. So the question is so elusive about how do you define what good art is? Is it something that moves you? But it's not going to move everybody. So I think it's so individual, but yet it has to also be collective by the nature of our society. So it's such a difficult question to answer. And I do think many would say it is what brings in money. I've heard people say that. I've heard people say, why don't you sell your photography to me? And to me, it's too vulnerable. And when you said, Billy, that you keep your pottery, I thought, oh no, I bet they're beautiful. I bet they're beautiful. But it's that inner critic that keeps you, I think artists who put it out there for us all to see are very courageous. And I'm very grateful for that courage.
Lori had something to say.
Yeah, Laurie, you've got your hand up.
What I was going to say is that when you even think, I agree with Catherine, I was going to say it is incredibly courageous, particularly for a woman then, but who decides what is good and what isn't? Who decides? Who puts that person in charge? It's like anything today, yesterday, in the past. Who gives the person power to decide whether or not it's good, whether or not it's acceptable? And that's what I think is so interesting, because anytime anyone is bold or steps out of what someone else thinks is the norm or should be right, it's fascinating that they can't handle it at first. I was so struck with the critics in the part of the book where she would overhear that they would say things that were so incredibly critical and so, to me personally, petty. And I just was fascinated by who gives them the power.
Yes, Arlene.
Awesome point.
Arlene?
I'm just, as a musician, I just thinking about how to really determine what's great art or great music takes time, and over time it changes, and so that eventually eras form, and one realizes that what some people did was more or less what the norm had been, and it wasn't all that great. So over time it changes sometimes the view of what was really great, really special.
Yeah.
Sandy?
I think that is so true. And what was fun for me as someone who's studied Monet a lot was to even see like the little mentions of him in history and how she brought kind of everyone back in. I thought the thread of history through it was amazing. But kind of like who decides, or even what they decide, like with abstract expressionism, how they go back and they really study and they listen and they hear Monet and I mean, because they're looking at it kind of in a different way. And I think that's a really unique way to see people from the past speaking to the people then in the 50s and the 60s, and then now as we go, who do we take from and carry it forward? And I think that's one thing that's kind of fun about historical fiction, especially when it weaves so much truth in, but you'd have to know kind of what is the truth. And but it excites you to go back and to Google things, and those people who approach it that way, I mean, that I think that's really exciting.
I'm glad you
Thanks,
enjoyed
Sandy.
it. That sounds good. I think one of the questions that we had, which I I think is really, to the late 19th century audience, the Impressionist way of seeing the world was radically different. How and why? And why was Cassatt drawn to understand other artists' creative process? What do you think drew her to the Impressionists?
I think she was curious.
Curious about what, Billy?
She had to be curious about a lot of things, about a different lifestyle. She up and moved to Paris. She was curious about the ideas and thoughts and ways that it was portrayed throughout this, and you see it in her work, about what people were doing, what they were thinking.
Lori?
A couple times in the book, or sort of, to me, one of the weaving themes was love. And I think that was part of the dynamic between male and female. And Degas kept talking about how you're painting love, you are seeing love. And the fact that it was so hard for him, and he was such a rough character, albeit that it was fictional. It was also the fact that as a female, as a woman, she was starting to gain some interest and some attention. Mm-hmm. And if we look back, how many people were painting mothers and children? They were painting things about being in a park. They were painting things about women bathing, or their boudoir, or the fact that she was painting, I think, families and love. And then there was also the en plein air, the beginning to do light. And people were so used to formal, dark, sober, academic. And now you have these people just come in with color and light. And again, that was a departure. When they see something different, they don't know what to do. And in time, it was refreshing to have her depictions of mothers and children.
Okay, I agree with you, Lori, and I really agree with the idea about the color and light, which seems to be, to me, where the Impressionists diverged from the more formal artwork. There's, the feeling of light over time, like capturing a moment. And I was just wondering if anyone else had any feelings about that change at that time.
Catherine, you had your hand up.
It wasn't about the lighting. I was just having the thought that if you picture Mary Cassatt being who she was, the strong woman, like Billy was saying, to go abroad at that time, to be in Paris, to be doing what she was doing instead of what women should be doing or seen as doing. And then you have the salon being the place where you're exhibited. And if her mind were that independent, which it seems to be, and you see that in the salon, you're hung wherever they want to hang you, whether it's in the rafters, evidently, or wherever. And then you think, where am I going with this? What is the end in this, that I keep putting my paintings in there up on the ceiling? Or then she has this other group and thinking, well, I could maybe make something of this. I don't know if that played in it at all. In other words, you could be one of the herd, just in the group that's going to be at the mercy of the salon, or you can try to make join the smaller group that maybe would forge ahead and be seen more. And I don't know if she thought like that or not, but being very independent already, not going under where probably her parents thought she should maybe go, or men thought she should go. It goes to think that she could have just been thinking more independently, that this salon road isn't leading where my path I want to go. And so to take a chance to see if she can make it with this, this other group, and also being drawn to how they were painting. But to me, when they were saying they were hanging pictures up in the rafters, I thought, well, my word, why do you want to even be in that? You can't even see your painting. What's the purpose? Just to have been selected. Where's it going? So
the
anyway,
purpose was putting food on the table.
Yeah, right.
To be quite honest with you.
But if you
I mean,
didn't
if you were
sell,
accepted and exhibited, then you can market yourself as a salon or academic artist to be able to sell your work. And that was honestly, it was a make or break thing.
Right. But if she had money from her family, then she also had, I was just thinking, opportunity to make more of her art is what I was thinking. It just seemed to me a better opportunity, even though I can't put myself in that position, you know? Yeah.
There's a little tidbit of something that's really interesting. The salon was a tremendous event for people to come. People would converge onto Paris. There were up to 10,000 visitors a day, and I think that's probably a lot during those times, and it could make or break someone. So that's of interest also.
She was a risk taker. 2 words, risk taker.
I think Catherine's idea is really interesting, and I had never thought about it that way, as trying to separate yourself from the herd and make yourself known. But you know, it was sort of established at the beginning of the book that even before the time that was described, that she was attracted to Degas' work in particular, but some of the other Impressionist artists, that it had caught her eye. It sort of captured her imagination. I do think that some of the questions that she asked was a way for the author to put some explication in there about the Impressionist techniques and ways of painting. But, you know, you also have to put yourself into the mindset that, you know, this is a style, a painting style that we have lived with now for 150 years. It doesn't look radical to us. It looks beautiful, but it doesn't look radical. It's something that we've always had. And we have, you know, come of age in a century where experimentation and challenging the norm is the norm. You know, we are okay with this. We're okay with this idea. We're okay with artists taking risks and doing things that aren't acceptable, because to us, that's just what artists do. But, you know, putting yourself in the time of seeing something so radically different from what people say is good art or art altogether, or the way that people are taught. I mean, these artists that learned in the academic style spent years just, you know, sketching after statuary that were in museums before they were ever, you know, taught how to paint. I mean, there was this long sort of drawn out process where your sense of individuality or creativity was completely secondary to just learning how to do these things in the right way. Laura, you had your hand up.
While I agree with some of what you're saying, there's still that aspect of subjective that comes in. When you say we're used to that, yes, because it's been there for a long time. But when an artist bursts on the scene and they've got something that's very different, they're still subjected to criticism. They're still subjected to opinion. And there are people that go, oh, I hate the Impressionist era, or, oh, I hate the Romantic. There's still that feeling of you're putting yourself out there to hear either this is incredible, this is the new artist on the scene, or you're going to hear this is the worst art I've ever seen. And I just think so much of it is so interesting, where and politics comes into play too, where either you agree or you disagree, whether you support or you don't support, whether what someone could say is not Basquiat. All of a sudden I was thinking of that, where, oh my gosh, he does this kind of art that is so extreme. And yet now we want to collect him, or some of us want to collect him. And it just depends so much on the time and the period. I think of Kehinde Wiley. All of a sudden he comes in on the scene. And at first, I'm sure some people thought, oh my God, what is this? And now he's again, someone that you want to collect, and you see from series on television to billboards to idea festivals. So I'm just always fascinated with who governs what is good and what isn't, and what is going to sell and what is not going to sell.
That gets us back to Barbara's original question.
Exactly.
What is good art and who says that it's good art?
Well, I don't even know if you can say the word good art. What is the art that's elevated? What is it that elevates art and has people elevated? What is it that does it? Is it being in the museum? Is it being sold in Sotheby's? Is it a certain gallery? But I think also a question when we were talking about all the different changes and you saying we're so used to changes, well, how did Impressionists lay the groundwork? Because I think Impressionism in that period of time was a big break from the standard. For us now, we accept it. But
it was, but it wasn't the first break. I mean, you had the realists, you had the romantics. There's all this long story of, you know, what is established and what we accept, and then what looks different and new at the time. So, I mean, the 19th century is rife with this, but I think that we also, sitting in art history classes, get this false narrative of art going along and this is how it is, and then something big happens, and then that happens for a while, and then a new thing comes along. But all of these things are sort of happening at the same time. That, you know, people still today, yesterday probably, created an impressionist painting. That just because, you know, post-impressionism came along and then modernism came along and cubism came along doesn't mean that something stopped. And there are plenty of artists that are still working in what we would call the academic style that, you know, the Impressionists were fighting against in the 19th century.
Well, I don't know. We had 3 minutes, but I thought it was also very interesting in the book to talk about Degas' macular degeneration, which was so debilitating, and Manet's syphilis, and how their diseases affected their lifestyle and their art.
Absolutely. Betsy, did you have your hand up? Or maybe it was Pat. Pat, did you have your hand up?
Yeah,
Go ahead, Pat.
Yeah, I was just going to say one of the things that was at just one tiny little point where he comes in and he looks at Mary's work and he says, "You've captured love." And you know, that's the critical difference of the art that was being developed at that time versus art that had been developed before. And, you know, because they were beginning to be aware of the limitations of just rendering. And so they were looking deeper into the emotional contents of work. And you also, with the colors, remember you've got the development of paints at this time. And paints are now in tubes, and they were able to, you know, use fresh paint as opposed to having to mix it all the time. So there were, and also the grasp of wanting. You know, this was a really energized period in Paris in every respect. You know, people were actually kind of looking for the change. But progress, everybody loves progress as long as it doesn't affect them. You know, so you always have that contradiction going on. But when that's the one part of the book that I really loved, was when he came in and he said, "You don't ever paint anything but love." And it wasn't, you know, a rendering of something. It was the emotion of love. And I thought that really captured the whole essence of what was happening during that time on it.
And
excellent points,
he
Pat.
thought, and he was not a lover.
No.
Nor was he loved.
Exactly.
He was capturing what was, he called capturing what is real, like, you know, the bathers or the stress on the dancers. He was capturing something very different.
So Barbara, you had sent over these couple of articles. Did you want to tell us about them really briefly before we end today?
Well, there's one about Berthe Morisot and Edouard Manet, which I thought was interesting, and I read a couple of others about them. But that's very interesting because it's that convoluted family where she married his brother because he was a version of him, and he married his father's mistress to legitimize the son. So it was a very interesting. She was always his muse. So I thought that was interesting that some of you might want to read about. And there was a little 7-minute talk on NPR, and I think it's in reference to OIiveira's book about Impressionists with benefits. So I thought that would be interesting. And is that the norm, Barbara? Is that the norm? What? What did you mean? Is that the norm, Jay? Oh, she's not here. I don't know. I don't know what she meant by is that the norm.
At any rate, thank you, Barbara, for choosing this book. It had been a while since I had steeped myself in this time period, and I loved all of the sort of local color and historical facts and transformations of the city of Paris that OIiveira incorporated into the book. It really made the book, I think, feel very immediate and rich in its storytelling. So as always, Barbara, you pick really nice selections for us. So thank you for choosing that and for looking at what we had in our collection and special exhibitions and finding something to marry with that. I really appreciate it. And you're taking the time today to put together the questions and to lead our conversation as well. And for choosing these articles in case anybody was interested in reading further. Next month, our selection is In the Shadow of the Moon, America, Russia, and the Hidden History of the Space Race by Amy Shariks. Amy is actually a local Asheville author whose book came out, I think, the exact week that we opened our current exhibition, Meeting the Moon, which is an exhibition exploring artists' relationship with the moon in American art, both before and after the Apollo program, which it is the 60th anniversary of this year. So thank you again, all of you, for coming. If you'd like to join us for next month's discussion, the registration is up on our website. In the meantime, have a great week and we'll see you again soon. Take care.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. I enjoyed the discussion.
Thank you.
Bye.